All right, I realize I haven't made a solid what's in my camera bag video or camera gear video in a while. In fact, the first and only time I really did a what's in my camera bag video was almost 2 years ago, and I was still living at my parents' place at the time. And yesterday I ended up getting this brand new camera bag, and it kind of inspired me to make one of these videos again. The reason I haven't made one of these in a while is kind of because I don't like talking about camera gear all that much. I really don't think that the camera makes the creative a lot better. Like, there are so many things you have to learn as a videographer and a filmmaker, things like exposure, proper composition, you know, how to properly move your camera to convey your message properly and to capture stuff in the right way. It's kind of one of the biggest barriers that keeps me from talking about camera gear. But that all being said, I obviously know the importance of talking and being transparent about the gear that I'm using, so you guys understand how I'm able to shoot and capture stuff in the way that I do. This video is not going to be a full what's in my camera bag video, because for me, I just don't want to spend 15-20 minutes talking about every single little thing I carry in here. Instead, I actually want to talk about just the cameras that I'm using right now on a daily basis to create my content, whether it's shooting sports, shooting client projects, or even just YouTube videos like this. Even though I don't really think that having the best camera will make you the best content creator possible, I personally understand the importance of having gear that allows you to be creative and also allows you to develop and grow as a creative, as a filmmaker, as a videographer. And I experienced that myself. And so this is kind of why I want to share this with you guys. Not only am I going to tell you the cameras that I'm using, but I'm going to tell you exactly why I purchased them and how they've benefited me so far, or how they might not have benefited me as a sports content creator and filmmaker. Also, just want to give a quick shout out to Nanik for sending me this camera bag yesterday. I'm going to give this a very thorough use before I make a review, but they sent me a few things to try out, and I've been using the same camera bag for like 2 years. It was like an in-case camera bag, and it was great, but this is a lot bigger, a lot heftier, and I'm really excited to see how this works in my workflow as a creative and just kind of how I'm able to carry my gear more efficiently with a bag like this. So stay tuned, but really big shout out to the people at Nanik for sending me this earlier to try out. And we're just gonna get right into it here. I don't really wanna waste your guys' time. I don't wanna go on a whole monologue. I just wanna get into the camera gear and show you guys what I'm using. So let's just hop right in. First things first is this guy right here. And if you watch my channel at all, if you guys are familiar with me, you know that I ride and die by my Sony a7S III. I got this camera back in 2019, 2020. Whenever this released, I got it upon release. I remember pre-ordering it. I was using the Sony a6300 at the time, and I was just really excited to take a step up, not just to a full frame camera, but a full frame camera with 4K across the board, and also something with 10-bit 422. And ever since buying this camera, I've said it a ton of times to other people. I've said it here on my channel. I've said it on social media. This was arguably the best purchase I ever made as a filmmaker, and a camera that I'm still using on a daily basis, and that I just can't convince myself to upgrade or move on from, because of how good the images that come from this camera are and how it's contributed to my development as a sports creative and filmmaker. I definitely owe you guys a long-term review of this camera, but just some of the main standouts as to why I love the a7S III. First off, it's an absolute monster in low light scenarios. It has a dual gain ISO, which means I have basically 2 base ISOs where I'm going to get a clean image. The base is 640 and the second base is 12800. So you can just imagine that if you're in a really dark scenario, being able to jack up your ISO to 12800 and get pretty much a clean image from noise on the ISO side of things is an incredible advantage to have, especially when you're shooting sports. Obviously, you're going to be put into a lot of scenarios and a lot of venues that don't really have great lighting as a sports videographer and creative. And because of this camera, that's never really been an issue. Just the fact that I can turn this up to 12800 with a clean look. I can sometimes even go up to like 3200 ISO and not really have any noise from going that high. It's an incredible camera to have at any point. Paired with the right lens, you're pretty much guaranteed low light night vision at any point. And also another really big thing that goes with that is the 10-bit image that comes out of this camera. Coming from the a6300, which was an 8-bit camera, that was a night and day difference. Being able to color grade the S-Log footage from this camera is an absolute treat. And I talked earlier in this video about the importance of choosing the right gear that will allow you to grow as a creative. And this is kind of exactly what I'm talking about. One of the main ways I've grown as an editor and as a filmmaker, I think, has been through my color grading. And that's all possible because you're able to push the image that comes out of this camera so much more than you would an 8-bit camera. And I really do love color grading the images images that come out of this camera. I really do just love the look it gives, and just overall just has allowed me to unlock my creativity in that way so much more. Quality wise, this can shoot up to 4K 120, which back in 2019, 2020, when this came out, was almost unheard of. This was one of the very first cameras that offered you that quality of filming at that frame rate. And you guys have probably seen in previous videos, I love shooting in 120 frames just to slow down those moments, whether I'm shooting hockey, basketball, or football. But I think every single frame rate and every single quality level of this camera, it looks great. This thing can also shoot 240 frames at 1080p. And while I don't use it that often, there are occasions where I have, and it looks great, and it's very, very slow. But recently, honestly, I've enjoyed just shooting in 24 frames with this camera. This camera actually shares a sensor with the FX3 and the FX6. And so you're able to just get really cinematic looking images from it at 24 frames. 60 frames is great as well at 4K without a crop. Overall, the video quality from this camera has been fantastic. I know there are cameras out there that can shoot 6K or even 8K, and that's great and all, but I really do think that I don't need that right now. I don't need a 6K camera. The 4K image from this camera is incredible. If you guys have seen stuff come out of this or the FX3, you guys know very much that this is becoming a very industry standard sensor for video work, especially in the sports world. You won't go to many sporting events now without seeing an FX3 or an A7S III on the sideline because of the quality that it brings, and also in such a small package. There is something to be said about the video that comes out of this camera, in my opinion. I don't know what Sony did with the sensor in this, the FX3 and the FX6, but the images that come out of it just look really pleasing to the eye. They're not overly sharp. It's not overly processed. And even though it's a 12 megapixel sensor, I think that actually lends itself to creating the image that comes out of these cameras. This, compared to my Sony a7C Mark II, which I'm actually shooting this video on right now, it's not as sharp, but that's not a bad thing. I kind of like that it's not as sharp or crisp in the way. This is a 6K downsampled sensor, I believe, on the a7C Mark II, but I just think that the image that comes out of here just looks more, and I hate using this word, but more cinematic, more soft, and I really do like the look of it. So yeah, that's a multitude of reasons as to why I adore the a7S III in a nutshell and why I still have it. A lot of people might be asking, why haven't you gone to the FX3 if it's the same sensor? But I could kind of say the whole thing the other way around. Why would I go to the FX3 if this is the exact same sensor and I already have it? There are obviously things that the FX3 has, like an internal fan and the, tally lights and other things that make it more, useful for a cinematographer or someone who works in video. But for me, I really do believe in the adage of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And right now, this thing is still running as if it was brand new. It still gets fantastic video. I also have a viewfinder in case I want to take photos, which is something that the FX3 doesn't have. At the end of the day, they're both the same sensor. I'm able to capture the same image with both cameras side by side. You probably couldn't tell the difference. And I just really personally like the way that this has worked for me so far. Does that mean I won't ever upgrade to an FX3 or an FX3 Mark II if it ever comes out? Probably. It depends. Like, it really depends on my situation. If this was ever to break, it would make maybe more sense for me to get an FX3. But for the time being, I love my a7S III. I'm going to keep riding with it until something better comes out. But yeah, this has been my main shooter now for almost 5 years, and it will continue to be my main shooter until something else comes out. Moving on now from the Sony a7S III, which is my primary video camera, we're going to move on to my secondary camera, which is the one I'm recording this video on right now, the Sony a7C Mark II. I got this camera earlier this year. I actually made a YouTube video about it. It was a kind of a spontaneous purchase. The a7C Mark II is essentially a mini a7 IV. It has the same sensor and all the features in a much smaller body. And up until that point, I was using my a6300 as my secondary camera, but there were a lot of limitations that kept me from using it in conjunction with my a7S III, primarily being the video quality and the bitrate. It would have just been, and it was, very hard to match the images due to the amount that I could push the color on an 8-bit camera compared to this one. While I have my a7S III, my a7C Mark II will always be a B camera for me in terms of video. This is always going to accompany it and be a supporting option. However, when it comes to photography, this thing is in the starting lineup every single night, way more frequently than I would use this for photos because of the 12 megapixel sensor on this camera. The a7C Mark II shares the same sensor as the Sony A7 IV, which is one of the best hybrid cameras on the market, and the images that come out of this sensor are stunning, sharp, fantastic colors, and I use this in pretty much any occasion where I need to take photos. It's essentially my main hybrid camera per se, while this is my main video driver. Now, I could have gotten an A7 IV and called it a day, but I really do think that the form factor of this camera was one of the biggest reasons why I bought it in the first place. It's small, it's light, it's compact, it doesn't take up too much space in my camera bag, and it still shoots great video, fantastic photo, like still shoots 4K up to 60 frames per second, 10-bit 422 video. I just talked about the photo specs. This thing packs a really big punch in a super small package. And I'm not just using this as a B camera for like interviews and stuff. I actually use this while shooting sports out in the field. Say I have this as usual in a handheld rig with a 28-75. I might have this slung over my shoulder with a 70-200. And the reason I do that is because if the play, say I'm shooting hockey, if the play is on the other end of the rink and I have this with a mid-range lens, I can actually just pull this up and use a longer lens without having to switch the lens on this camera, which takes precious seconds to do, and you might miss what happens in front of you. In sports, things happen really quickly, and I like the fact that I don't have to take, 5 to 10 seconds to switch the lens. All I got to do is put this one down, pull this one up, and start shooting, and I'm not missing any moments at all. Now, one small feature I didn't think I would like in the A7C Mark II is the fact that it shoots up to 4K 60 with a crop. Now, a lot of people might hate the fact that it shoots in a crop, but as someone who shoots sports, I'm not always right up against the action. So if it's ever really far for me and I'm shooting in 4K 60, the crop factor on this lens actually kind of allows you to have multiple focal lengths with whatever lenses you have. So say I have a 70-200 with the 4K 60 crop, it pretty much turns into a 105-300, giving me an extra 100 millimeters of focal length that I didn't have otherwise. That can be really useful in certain situations as a sports videographer. The A7C Mark II has honestly been the camera I didn't know I needed. I thought I would use it just for photos, but honestly, it's kind of become my day-to-day camera for things like YouTube videos, Instagram content, TikTok. It's small and easy to set up. It doesn't take up a large footprint, which my A7S III does, just due to the fact that I have it in a cage and it's a bit heavier. This sits on a Gorilla Pod on my desk whenever I want to shoot videos like this. It's small and compact, and I think I really didn't understand how important that was when creating social media content. And also, even when it comes to something like travel, I actually traveled with this camera several times and have left this at home. At this point, this camera has kind of just become my big boy workaholic project camera, versus this is the camera I create daily content on. And it really has fit seamlessly into my workflow as a creative, and I haven't looked back since purchasing it. Moving on to the third camera in my bag, and it is one that you will all recognize if you're on social media, and it is the Fuji X100V, probably one of the most popular and polarizing cameras of the last few years, and back in the mainstream because of the Fujifilm X106 that was just announced and released by Fujifilm. I bought this because of the hype that we all saw on social media. I fell into the trap of what everyone else was doing, and I liked the images that came from it. I loved the fact that you didn't have to edit photos. I really bought it spontaneously, and I got very, very lucky that I got what feels like one of the last one of these in Ontario back 2 years ago. I remember vividly, I was literally going to shoot a wedding with my business partner that day, and I saw that a camera store had limited stock, and I put my order in right away, and I got it not too long after. And I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I know I just preached the hell out of my last two cameras, but on a day-to-day basis, this is one of my favorite cameras I've ever purchased. Now, is this a camera that I would recommend to all sports creatives? No, because this isn't meant to shoot sports. I use this way more just to capture my day-to-day life, personal moments when I'm hanging out with friends, family, etc., etc. This isn't really something I used to a degree at sporting events. I always have it with me, and I have shot a lot of really cool images using this camera at major events like the Stanley Cup Final. I got to bring this into the locker room when the Golden Knights were celebrating. I used this during the Winter Classic to capture a few photos. This thing is really handy if you know how to use it, but there are limitations to it. And if you're not familiar with the camera, one of the main limitations is the lens, is that it's a fixed 23mm lens. I cannot take this off and switch it for a longer lens. I'm stuck at 23 millimeters. That is one of the main reasons why I wouldn't recommend everyone to get it. It's not something I use in my workflow as a professional sports filmmaker and content creator. I use this for fun. I use this to capture memories. And in that scenario, it does great. It's a fantastic camera, and there's a reason I carry this around everywhere. Even if I'm just going on a walk, I have this over my shoulder or I have this in my backpack because I just love the experience of taking photos with this camera. There is one way though that this has actually been beneficial for me at major sporting events for work, and that's because of the film recipes that you can build into the camera. Essentially, there are a few simulations that you can tweak in here to make the images coming out of camera ready to go with a film-like look. And that's been really useful for me as someone who shoots for social media. You have to get stuff up and ready to go as soon as possible. And in a scenario like shooting the Stanley Cup final locker room, I was just going in with this, snapping photos as much as I could, and then they were already edited with the simulation I had in camera. I believe I did like a black and white style film simulation, and it was really easy from there. As soon as I was done shooting them, I took my phone, transferred them wirelessly, and then just sent them off to get published. And it was a really easy process, and it saves you time from having to go into Lightroom, set your preset, and then adjust your images accordingly. You can pretty much get an image ready to go out of the camera as soon as you shoot it, which I think is a fantastic advantage. And it just adds that film aesthetic that we all really look for and like these days. It's based off of actual film stocks, which I think is really cool. And I've messed around with a lot of them, and the possibilities with this camera are essentially endless. You just have to work past the fact that you can't change the lens. But I also think that's a nice challenge for me, especially as someone who's really trying to learn photography more. It challenges me and it puts me outside of my comfort zone, which is another thing I really like about the experience of owning this camera. Now, obviously Fuji just released the X100VI, so naturally a lot of people who know I have this camera have been asking me, are you going to upgrade and move on to the X100VI? And my short answer is no. At the end of the day, the X100V is a novelty camera for me. It's something that I use for fun. It's something that I shoot very casually with. It's not something that makes me a living. And to that point, I don't really see a reason to upgrade to the X100VI because I already have two cameras that can shoot great video and great photo. The main upgrades of the X100VI are being 6K video and also a higher megapixel sensor. If I want to take high megapixel sensor photos, I'm going to use my A7C Mark II. And if I want to shoot high quality video, I'm just going to use my A7S III. Like, the video quality on this camera sucks, full transparency. It's not good and I rarely use it. I only use this for photos, and it's a much more casual setting than the other cameras I use, which is why I'm going to be sticking with this for the time being. I love my X100V. I think it's a fantastic camera for any hobbyist, for anyone who just wants to have more fun or fall in love with more with photography. But yeah, that's kind of my spiel on as to why I have the X100V. I love using this. It's a really fun camera. It's reignited my love for photography and content creation, something I carry around with me every single day. Yeah, it has its place in my camera bag for that reason. The next camera I'm going to be talking about is one that I actually don't really mention a lot here on the channel, and it is the Insta360 1R. And I'm gonna keep it short and sweet with this guy. This is my behind the scenes camera. You guys have probably seen the videos I shoot with it where you see the perspective of me shooting sporting events. And that really is all I use it for, is behind the scenes content. It's a action camera. It's like a GoPro Max or anything else like that, or any other 360 camera that Insta360 has. It's fantastic for getting footage of me working because I can't just hire someone and get them a pass to come in and shoot me doing it. So at the end of the day, this is how I get behind the scenes footage of myself. It's a fun camera to own. I use this as well when I go snowboarding or when I'm messing around with my friends, but there really is no main use case for it. The battery life is average on this. The dynamic range is okay. It's the same image that you'd really get out of any action cam. But at the end of the day, you know, it's good to have in my bag, and you never know when you may want a POV shot. It's modular. It has 2 lenses. But other than that, not much to write home about. The Insta360 1R is just my behind the scenes camera, and that's that. My next camera is actually not in my camera bag, but in a different case behind my bag because I don't normally use this. And because of that, it may be one of the most controversial purchases I've made in my career, and that is a drone, specifically the DJI Mini 3. And a lot of things could be said about drones. The main reason I'm kind of saying it's controversial and I kind of regret it is because even though this drone is incredible, it takes some awesome images, photos, videos, 10-bit video. Like, this thing is awesome for drones of this size, of the sub 240 grams. That being said, I don't fly it that often. I live in Canada, I live in Ontario, and drone laws can be pretty tough. So a lot of the time it gathers dust on my, on my shelf, or it just sits in a bag underneath my desk. And I don't really get to use it that much. And I spent like $1,500 on this for it just to sit around. It sucks that I barely get to use it, and I just also kind of overestimated how much I would use it, especially for sports. There's not many use cases for using a drone apart from getting wide scenics from the air of an arena or a stadium. Instead of purchasing this now in retrospect, I feel like I could have just hired a drone pilot or, rented the drone from a friend. And so that way I'm not stuck with the fact that like, oh, I have $1,500 worth of camera equipment sitting under my desk that don't work. My use cases for this are minimal, and it's really unfortunate because again, this does shoot very great video and photo. I just haven't really found the scenarios to use it. So if anyone's thinking of getting a drone and you work in the sports industry, I'm gonna tell you right now, you might be better off just saving your money, especially if you live somewhere with very strict drone laws. I have used this a little bit while traveling. I've used this a little bit while in different areas. I'm gonna be heading to California in a little bit. So I'm really excited to finally break this thing out of its cage and let it fly for a little bit. But at the end of the day, there's just not enough use cases for me to justify a drone. But yeah, I classified this as one of my cameras. Great little drone, just sucks I don't get to use it as much. And it really sucks that I'm restricted by the drone laws in my area, but it is what it is. The last camera I want to talk about is one that I've definitely never mentioned on the channel, and it is this guy. This is a Minolta Freedom 3 film camera. It's just a point and shoot. It's like my third film camera. I bought it 2 or 3 years ago off Facebook Marketplace for like 50 bucks. And it really is a simple camera that I use to carry around and capture moments in a non-digital format. Pretty easy to use. You just look down the viewfinder, take your photo, and you're done. At the end of the day, this was kind of what the X100V is for me now. Something I carried around with me when I was seeing friends, going out, having a good time with family or loved ones. But ever since getting the X100V, obviously this shoots film simulations. So this has kind of just sat on the shelf and not really done anything for the last little while. But there is something to be said about film photography and the, pure art of taking photos and film and not being able to see what it looks like. There's also something to be said about getting your film roll developed and remembering everything you shot after seeing it come in. It's a really cool experience. I really recommend everyone try shooting film at some point. It's just a different experience than it is shooting digital. And it's just fun little cameras to carry around itself. But yeah, this is just another camera that every once in a while makes its way out of my bedroom, off my shelf, but it competes really heavily with the X100V. But maybe after making this video, I have almost a full roll in here. I don't know when this roll's been in since, but maybe I'll start rolling this out a little more. I actually used this once at the Stanley Cup final in 2021 or 2022, whenever the Avalanche were in the final. And I actually got some pretty interesting photos during that playoff run, during that finals with this camera before I got the X100V. And a lot of people love seeing this thing. It's retro. People love talking about films. So yeah, this is the last camera I wanted to talk about, was my Minolta Freedom 3 point and shoot. Honorable mention here for my iPhone 14 Pro. I don't use this at all for like professional video stuff. Obviously, phone video has its place, especially in sports social media content. We use that a lot with the NHL social strategy. Like phone video is really, really good in certain scenarios. But for me, it really is a camera that I use to capture moments, really a camera I use for behind the scenes. If I don't have my Insta360 and I just want to capture a video of my rig or whatever I'm shooting, this is great. I also have made it a habit of whenever I'm out shooting a sporting event, especially one I've never been to before, or just one that I want to remember, I will always take a phone video, just kind of everything that's happening. So then one day when I go down my camera roll, I can find that memory and sit on it for a little bit instead of just seeing it in high quality through my other cameras. There's just something about the rawness and realness with phone cameras. And also, if you're someone who doesn't want to spend a lot of money on a camera right off the bat, but you want to get into photography or videography, don't sleep on your phone. These are the cameras that you carry with you every single day. And a lot of people will tell you the best camera is the one you have on you. This is on me 24 hours a day, every time I leave the house. So honorable mention to my iPhone 14 Pro. Phone cameras are just getting better and better, so make sure you're taking advantage of that. And those are all the cameras I essentially have in my arsenal as a sports content creator. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's kind of fun to see the full collection of cameras I have all together, kind of reminiscing as to why I got them and the moments I've used them. They're all in my camera bag and in my arsenal for a reason. Everything I buy, I try to get for a specific purpose and not just have it lie around. And yeah, so those are all my cameras. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys learned something. If you guys have a question about any of the cameras I mentioned in this video, please let me know in the comments and I'll be sure to respond as quick as I can to help you guys with your questions. If you guys found this video informative, if you learned something, if you enjoy this kind of content, please consider liking the video down below. And also, if you're just finding me for the first time and you like my content, if you want to learn more about sports content creation and what it's like to be in this world, or if you've been around for a while and haven't hit subscribe, please consider doing so. We are on the road to 10K subscribers. We are almost at 7K. So the final stretch is here. So please consider subscribing if you haven't down below. I would really, really appreciate it. And that is it from me in this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys so much for sticking with me. And I will catch you guys in the next video. Take it easy.